This is a story of Mary Bell, an 11-year-old who strangled two little boys in 1968. Mary Bell was an 11-year-old girl in Newcastle who strangled two little boys in 1968, 4-year-old Martin Brown in May and 3-year-old Brian Howe 9 weeks later. She was the youngest female killer in British history and was diagnosed as a psychopath by 4 court-appointed psychiatrists at her trial. What I can't get past is that none of those psychiatrists ever heard about what her mother had been doing to her since she was 4 years old, and the defense never put it in front of the court. May 1968 in Newcastle upon Tyne, a 4-year-old boy named Martin Brown walks to a sweet shop near his home, buys a piece of candy, and starts walking back. About 15 minutes later, 3 older boys looking for scrap wood climb into an abandoned house on St. Margaret's Road and find him on the floor of an upstairs bedroom. Head on his back, arms above his head, blood and saliva running from the corner of his mouth. A workman tries CPR, but it's already too late. The pathologist who examined Martin the next day, a guy named Bernard Knight, who would later become one of the most respected forensic pathologists in the UK, couldn't find any sign of violence on the body. He couldn't determine a cause of death at all. Martin Brown was buried by the official record as a child who died of nothing in particular. In reality, he had been strangled. The girl who killed him was so small and so practiced at hiding it that the British medical system didn't realize a child had been murdered. 2 days after Martin's funeral, the local day nursery on Woodland Crescent is broken into overnight. The intruders peel slate tiles off the roof to get inside. They smear ink and poster paint across the floor and leave 4 handwritten notes scattered around the building, written in childish printing, alternating between 2 different handwritings. The first note reads, "I murder so that I may come back." The second, "We did murder Martin Brown." The third, "Watch out, there are murderers about." The Newcastle police find these 4 notes, written in clear handwriting that any forensic document examiner could analyze in an afternoon. And they conclude it was a sick prank by older children. They installed a burglar alarm at the nursery and moved on. They don't connect it to Martin's death. 2 days after the notes were written, an 11-year-old girl from the same neighborhood knocks on the front door of Martin's mother's house. The mother, June Brown, opens the door. The girl smiles at her and asks if she can see Martin. June tells her that Martin is dead. The girl, still smiling, says, "Oh, I know he's dead. I wanted to see him in his coffin." June Brown slams the door. 9 weeks later, a 3-year-old boy named Brian Howe walks out of his front door to play. He is last seen in the street with his older sister, the family dog, and the same 11-year-old girl who knocked on June Brown's door. Hes found 7 hours later between 2 large concrete blocks on waste ground near the railway, strangled with one hand pinching his nostrils shut and the other gripping his throat. With puncture wounds on his legs, hair cut off in sections, and genitals partially mutilated. And on his stomach, scratched in with a razor blade, the letter M. The lead detective figures out she's the killer the next day when she slips up about a pair of broken scissors that nobody outside the police knew existed. Her name was Mary Bell. She was 11 years old. She was, and still is, Britain's youngest female killer. In December 1968, she goes on trial at Newcastle Assizes. 4 court-appointed psychiatrists examined her and diagnosed her with psychopathic personality disorder. An 11-year-old psychopath. The judge, when asked whether there was any facility anywhere in the United Kingdom equipped to treat a child like her, hears the answer no, calls this unhappy, and sentences her to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure. She gets sent to a young offenders unit in Lancashire, where she's the only female among 24 boys. 25 years later, the same unit will house John Venables, one of the 2 boys who killed James Bulger. What bothers me is what the 4 psychiatrists who diagnosed an 11-year-old as a psychopath never heard, because the defense chose not to introduce it and the family chose not to come forward. Mary Bell's mother was a woman named Betty McCrickett. She was 17 when Mary was born, according to Mary's aunt, who was present at the hospital, in the minutes. After Mary was born, the staff tried to place the baby in Betty's arms, and Betty pushed her away and shouted 6 words, "Take the thing away from me." Around 1960, when Mary was 3, Betty dropped her from a first-floor window And on a separate occasion, she gave Mary a quantity of sleeping pills that a 3-year-old should not have been able to survive. On a third occasion, she sold Mary through an adoption agency to a mentally unstable woman who couldn't have her own children, and Mary's older sister Catherine had to travel alone across Newcastle to retrieve her and bring her home. Mary's family repeatedly offered to take custody of her, but Betty refused every time. And from somewhere around the age of 4, according to Mary herself in interviews she gave decades later, her mother began allowing her clients to touch her inappropriately. Mary states her mother actively participated in some of those sessions. By the time she was 8, this had been her life for 4 years. But none of this was introduced as evidence at the 1968 trial. The 4 psychiatrists who diagnosed an 11-year-old psychopath did so based on her behavior during interviews and on the facts of the killings. They had no access to her family history. The defense apparently decided that putting Betty McCrickett on the stand was unworkable, so they made a calculation. And Betty sat in the public gallery during the entire trial, sobbing loudly, while reporters noted that she was selling stories about Mary to the British and German tabloid press during and after the proceedings. There's a journalist named Gitta Sereni who covered that trial and never let it go. She wrote 2 books on the case, 26 years apart. The second one was based on over 70 hours of interviews she conducted with Mary as an adult. And there's a sentence in that second book said by Mary herself. Reflecting on the killings decades later, she said, "I didn't know I had intended for them to be dead. Dead forever. Dead for me then did not mean forever." An 11-year-old who had been told from infancy that her own life didn't matter did not understand that other lives could end. The court never knew that because the court never asked. I'm not trying to excuse what she did. 2 little boys are dead. Martin Brown's mother lived the rest of her life feeling phantom tugs at the back pocket of her trousers, expecting to turn around and see him. None of what I just narrated brings either of them back. In 1993, 25 years later, 2 10-year-old boys would walk a toddler named James Bulger out of a shopping center in Liverpool and kill him. Britain learned nothing in those 25 years. A couple of things I genuinely want to hear takes on. Was the defense right not to put Betty McCrickett on the stand? They apparently decided it was unworkable. But the consequence was an 11-year-old getting diagnosed as a psychopath without anyone in the room knowing what she'd survived. Should psychiatric evaluations of child defendants legally require family history access? The 4 psychiatrists worked entirely off interviews and the killings themselves. In 1968, that was standard. Is it still defensible now?